Welcome to the Build Wealth Canada podcast, where it's all about becoming debt-free, accelerating your wealth, and taking control of your money. Now, here's your host, Cornell Schreiber.
Hey, it's Cornell and welcome to the Build Wealth Canada show. When we first hit our financial independence number 8 years ago, one of the financial planners that I asked to take a look at our numbers before my wife and I quit our full-time jobs was Ed Rempel. And at the time, I asked Ed if he could do his own math and analysis on our numbers to make sure that I didn't miscalculate something when I was doing it myself. And this way I could be certain that my wife and I could quit our jobs and live off our portfolio going forward. Well, fast forward to today, it's been around 8 years since we quit our full-time jobs. And so I thought it would be helpful to have Ed back on the show and to once again use us as a case study on how one can live off their portfolio in a sustainable, stress-free, and tax-efficient way here in Canada. Now, on this episode, you're going to learn what strategies and frameworks tend to work when it comes to living off your portfolio here in Canada. You learn about a big mistake that I made, which was actually causing me money anxiety, even though our investment portfolio was going up in value. So Ed helped me get through that, and it's actually a mistake that is totally avoidable and a skill that you can start building and mastering today. So definitely stay tuned for that. And when it comes to a strategy for paying the least amount of tax in Canada, Ed takes us through two main strategies that you can choose depending on your situation so that you pay the least amount of tax throughout your lifetime. We'll cover all this and much more in the interview. And a quick little bio about Ed. He is a fee-for-service financial planner. Here in Canada, he's done over 1,000 financial plans throughout his life, and he is a CPA and CFP. So he's got the designation in Canada on both the tax side and the financial planning side, which is really nice. He's been featured in the Canadian Money Saver magazine, the Globe and Mail, the Financial Post, Morningstar Canada, and many, many more. And you can check out his excellent educational content over at edrempel.com. That's Ed, REMPEL.com. And now let's get into the interview. All right, Ed, welcome back to the show.
Great to be here, Cornell.
So Ed, when you updated our financial plan, one of the major insights that I got from that whole exercise is how critical it is to actually track your household expenses, especially the non-discretionary essential expenses that you actually need to spend every month to live. And I found that knowing that monthly number is not only critical when you're working your way towards financial independence so that you can avoid things like bad debt, for example, but I actually found it to be really critical in early retirement as well, or just retirement in general, to basically prevent anxiety about running out of money and to know how sustainable your lifestyle is when you are living off your portfolio. So can you speak to your process when it comes to this, and what have you found works well when trying to figure this out with your clients?
When I started years ago in financial planning, I was doing what I think a lot of other advisors do, where you just take a rough idea. You assume that whatever they're making is what they're spending, and they need to retire on 75 or 80% of that. And what I found is nobody actually bought into it or believed that it was actually real. I found, so to make it real with actual expenses. So we actually go through with every client as part of our financial plan. What are they spending now by category? And we make sure that the total roughly is what they're actually spending. And for retirement, we have a detail that you start with the same numbers, but you adjust them all for what's the retirement lifestyle you want. You start thinking about what are you going to do in your retirement? And then you have a very detailed number. And then clients can actually decide on their own. Like we have some that, for example, will take what they're spending, but most of them want to add a chunk on for travel and entertainment and maybe some other things, maybe nicer cars or whatever they want to do in retirement. And it might even be a big number. But now they've set a very specific retirement goal for what they want. And now it's something they believe in and they're actually going to do. And they can see that if I do this, to the plan, I'll actually tell them, here's what you have to do. And that's the retirement that you get, And then it's very, very personal. It's very much, what you've decided to do.
Yeah. And I thought we could discuss the situation I ran in because I think it could be quite applicable to people both going towards FI and those who have already achieved it and are getting ready for retirement. So the situation that happened with us, and I remember when I first came to you, Ed, about updating our numbers and updating our plan, was we were in a really weird situation in that the net worth has climbed over time. So even though we've had that early retirement milestone years ago, net worth has actually grown because the markets were doing well. Plus, I did some stuff on the side, like I ran the summit for several years. And so the net worth was higher than when we actually retired. And yet my anxiety when it comes to money was actually high, which is really a weird situation. It doesn't make logical sense. And I came to you saying, I don't get this because I should be less stressed about money instead of more stressed because we have more now. And when we did this analysis years ago, you said we have enough. Now we've got more and I'm still stressed. What's going on? And the big insight that I got from working together when you did our financial plan and we went through this process with you where we actually itemized these different expenses, we actually put them into the plan, it was that you actually need to do that in order to believe the math, in order to not be stressed. Because I'm sure some listeners could probably relate to this, or at least the way my brain works, I noticed by going through this, is that if I don't know what the spending is, like if I don't know, let's say, what our groceries are going to be every month, then my brain automatically will just go to the worst case scenario, like the worst case catastrophic scenario where I can't pay the credit card bill, the markets drop, and now I have to sell more than I planned because we overspend, and then I'm getting anxious about it. And so I thought when we did the plan together, you said, okay, you're asking me these questions like, okay, how much are you spending on this? How much are you spending on this? And a lot of times I would say, I actually don't know. Like, I know we're not overspending because we've been adding to the portfolio actually, but I can't actually tell you. And so if we're going to be running different projections, they're not going to be very accurate because we're not using my real numbers. And so I had to go back to almost like budgeting 101 and actually figure this out and track our spending and know what we're spending. And then that let us have an actual good plan that I believed and that I'm not getting anxiety over. So it was really interesting how things went full circle, right? Because when I think of the whole budgeting thing, I think of someone, especially like being straight out of university or post-secondary, you're trying to figure all this money stuff out. You're not making a lot yet. So you do budgeting, right? And you have this constraint on yourself. And then as you make more money and you save, it's easy to let that kind of slip and fall to the wayside. And then now that we're actually like trying to live off the portfolio here, it's actually, you still need to do that. This isn't like some skill that you can just ignore once you've achieved financial independence, because there's always going to be those constraints. And it's obviously very easy to overspend. There's always going to be more things you could spend money on. And so this kind of like micro management of this actually is very critical. Can you speak to that, Ed? Because you've created this process after, I know you've done like over 1,000 financial plans at that point. And I mean, after all those, this is what you are now using, what you've come up with. So clearly, I'm guessing other clients have also found this to be valuable instead of just like ballparking expenses and being like, oh, 80% of our portfolio should go to this. You know what I mean? And just not being very granular with it.
Yes. So this is exactly what a financial plan helps you with. It gives you confidence. You know what your retirement goal is, like for what you're doing, what are you on track for? How much can you confidently spend? And you don't have to worry about it as long as you're within that number. And then usually most people have discretionary that are whatever you define as, like really anything could be changed if you want. You could move to a different country, a different house or whatever. But for the most part in your lifestyle, there's a lot of things that are pretty regular. And then there's a few things that are extra that you can spend money on. Like in your case specifically, it's travel, entertainment, and parts. So these are things you could consciously make a choice to spend more or less. And those are the ones that fluctuate a lot. Now your situation is the opposite from a lot of people. So although I've seen both lots of cases, for example, a lot of people are somewhat short on their plan. And we can say, look, okay, you're getting to the age where you want to retire, but you're a little behind. What that means is you don't get 20,000 a year that you wanted for travel. You get 15 or 10. That's where you are. So if you could be behind, we go back to the incomes or the retirement target. Say, okay, you're this much behind. Which of these do we want to cut? I want to see what it is. This is how it affects your lifestyle. That's right. Or you can work a little longer and then you'll be able to get that extra travel as well. In your case, it's the opposite, that you actually have more money even than you need and even money coming in on top. The amount that you can afford to spend is a fair amount more than you're actually spending. And yet you still have anxiety about spending too much, right? But I've actually seen that a fair amount. It's often people who are fairly frugal. They've been that way all their life. Now they've saved up. That's how you save up a bunch of money. But then even after you hit to financial independence, or after you retire, you still don't give up that frugalness. And then So we've actually had clients where they're spending more, and I'm telling you, this is what you're spending. This is where your money is. And, it's going to compound for 40 more years. Let's say you live to 90 or 100. It's going to compound for a few more decades, and you end up with a ridiculous high amount of money, right? So is that really what you want in your life? Is to, you live frugally all your life, and then your kids, when they're 70, inherit, $30 million. Is that a perfect life for you? So in your case now, we'll be able to say, okay, this is how much you can spend. And here's all the discretionary part. Let's take those out first. Now the non-discretionary, this is how you've got X amount of money that you can spend on travel, entertainment, and cars. So think about it each year. What do you want to do? How many trips you want to take? How often you want to go for dinner? And what things you want to do? And when do you buy a car? But those are the things you can make conscious choices about. And if you don't do that, what happens a lot of times, first of all, they get anxiety one way or the other. The other thing is you get lifestyle creep. Right? Where just every year you spend a little bit more, and you get used to it, and it just creeps up on you. And that's what can get you in trouble over a period of time. So looking at the cash flow, when you know the numbers, you know what you can afford, that's good. What can help you keep on track with all those things.
Yeah, and I noticed one approach that really helped me from the anxiety standpoint, and then you have your own approach. So I thought we could discuss those. So I found ultimately, after going through all this, the way of looking at it, I'm just sharing this because I hope this will help others as well, because it definitely helped lower my anxiety by numerous notches, was, and you mentioned this a little bit already, Ed, is viewing expenses as discretionary versus non-discretionary. So the non-discretionary being things that we really need to just to live off, right? So things like groceries come to mind, things like property tax, heating, electricity, that kind of thing. And then the non-discretionary bucket being just things that we can spend for fun. And so what really helped me, and what Ed really helped me with from an anxiety reduction standpoint, was once I started tracking our expenses and actually knowing our actual non-discretionary expenses, once I knew what that number was. So for us, it was something like $43,000-ish is what it was based on last year. Keep in mind, we don't have a mortgage anymore. So that's why that number will probably seem low to a lot of people, because there's no mortgage in there because that's been paid off. But so for our situation, it was 43K-ish. And so I'm like, all right, that's how much we need to spend on groceries and kids' schooling things and things of that nature. And so anything that is above that is things that we can spend on discretionary items. And so I remember for me, one thing that kind of what I've noticed with a lot of like different budgeting software and things like that is those, oh, well, how much do you want to spend on going out to the movies? How much do you want to spend on, I don't know, video games or these different things? And for me, it was kind of like, well, I don't really want to budget and say, oh, I can only spend this much on movies and this much on games. For me, it's more like what I found worked well for me was, okay, just tell me what is this, how much is this discretionary bucket? And I'll just spend from that bucket doing different things that we think are fun and fun experiences and things of that nature. Because I know that non-discretionary bucket, that 43,000 is covered. And so anything above and beyond that I can spend freely, and I don't have to micromanage that discretionary bucket. And so I know with Ed, where the whole plan was very helpful, was he would say, okay, so your portfolio by itself can cover this 43,000 and then some. And here's how much more it can cover in addition to that. And so for me, I'm kind of in that camp where I'll just save and hoard the money. And okay, so anything above this 43K, go and like actually spend this, like take your family on vacation, go use it. Because you don't want to be on this thing where you're this like one of the richest people in the retirement home and then you die. And it's like, well, you could have spent that money on experiences with your children and your grandkids, things like that. And so for me, that was really helpful to say, when Ed and I met, eventually became to a number that said, here's pre-tax and after-tax, how much you can withdraw from your portfolio every single year, inflation adjusted. We know 43 is your non-discretionary expenses. And so anything above that, below that limit, is what you can spend on discretionary things. And that personally gave me a lot of peace of mind. And then the other component was a lot of people that work in retirement or they come projects that generate some sort of income. Like in my case, I have the podcast, I ran the summit for a few years. And so it's like, okay, if you make money, and we're going to touch on this a bit later, but in those cases, it's like you also make money in those sources. And so that's kind of like extra in addition to that you can spend as well, because you've got these extra income sources coming in. So that was really helpful for me and of how to look at it. It was a huge help because I basically came to Ed stressed and left unstressed. And he's not a shrink, he's a financial guy. So that was really helpful. And now a quick intermission to tell you about an additional free resource that you may find helpful. On this podcast, we often cover best practices that can not only help you now, but will also be relevant throughout your investment lifetime. But what if you also want an update on what is happening with your investments, the markets, and the economy right now? So to help me stay up to date on these topics, a great Canadian podcast that I listen to weekly is called Views from the Desk. They provide timely information for us Canadians on what is happening to our investments right now, as well as other key factors affecting us, like changes to our interest rates, our inflation, and regulatory changes that we should know about here in Canada. The podcast is hosted by BMO ETFs. I'm a huge fan of theirs. I own a lot of BMO ETFs myself, and it's a great resource for both new and existing ETF investors. I hope you check them out. All episodes are available for free in your favorite podcast player. Just search for Views from the Desk. Ed also looked at it from another angle too, where, and I'll let you speak to this, where you viewed it as, let's also see what your current lifestyle costs and what it will be in retirement. And let's actually talk about where you'd like your lifestyle to be. And then, so we actually have those numbers in there as well. Do you want to speak to that a little bit, Ed?
Sure. Yes. That's what you spend now and what do you want in retirement. I think is such a key thing and go in detail. And then you're living the life that you want. You specifically defined, right? Now, in your case, like the non-discretionary can be different for different people. For you, it's travel, entertainment, cars. So those are things, and you can actually fluctuate them a lot if you want. Like, for example, you could say, I'm not going to travel or buy a car this year. So entertainment, couldn't probably cut it to zero, but you could vary that a lot if you wanted to in either direction, right? Other people, it's other things. For example, I run into this house rich and cash poor issue, and people will come to me and say, I want to buy this really expensive, nice house. Can I afford it? Well, one thing is just, do you qualify for the mortgage and all that? That's one factor of it. But the other part of ours, does it make sense in your financial plan? And often, so then what happens is all the house costs are now becoming a discretionary thing because you can choose, do I want to buy this expensive, really nice home or stay where I am or buy something? Or it's also often the same thing as I'm going to retire, I'm going to downsize and buy something quite a bit cheaper, maybe outside of Toronto, like whatever it is, in a much smaller city. So it's quite a lot cheaper. So the house costs can even be somewhat discretionary there. But what actually happens then is we do the retirement in detail, say, okay, you have this nice home. So now all these house costs are higher. And then in this case, the mortgage doesn't even be gone for, in your case, but in other case. So then we say, well, now you're behind on your plan, but you can be on track if you cut down your spending for entertainment and travel, that kind of thing. Right. So that now then people actually can make a conscious life choice. Wow. So I could afford this house, this nice house, if I travel quite a lot less. What do I want to do? And then I find that financial planning is often most effective if it's two different lifestyle choices. And you can think about which one is actually more me. Which way would I have a more happier, more fulfilling life? I could have the nice home, and invite people over for entertainment, but half day home. Or I can have a more modest place and then I got lots of money for travel and entertainment. So I guess it just lets you take control of your life. You can decide what's important to you and you can live the life that you want to live.
Yeah, and you mentioned a couple of times now the three expense types. So the cars, the entertainment, and what was the other one, Ed?
Travel.
And travel. Yeah, so I remember when we first started talking, you mentioned those three. And like for me personally, I don't really care about cars. So that's not really a big one for me other than just we need something from point A to point B. But for some people, that's like a very much like partial like luxury item too, because that's you could get a cheap car or you could pay an extra $20,000 and get this fancy thing. So then so I see what you're saying, how there is that sort of gray area too, where it's like, well, yeah, we need a car, sure. What kind of car? Because some things are like discretionary and non-discretionary together. But I remember one thing that was interesting when we first started talking was you mentioned those three categories. The reason you like to focus on those was because you said those are the three that can be very variable. They can very much fluctuate and you've got a lot of control. Whereas you mentioned that the other expenses in our lives, a lot of them tend to be a lot more predictable. And so that's why you did like to divide it up, where it's like you got all these other things, but then these three sort of big ones are like the horsemen of like discretionary spending. You know what I mean? Did I summarize that in an okay way?
Yes, it is different for different people, but those are the three we often see as discretionary. And that's what it was in the UK specifically. Like cars, most years you don't buy a car, but you are going to buy them sometime. And it's a chunk of money when you do buy them. So you have to think of it there. And part of it, why it's easy to spend less is you can keep your car much longer and buy used cars. You can spend a lot less on cars if you want to. Cars are, I find it's a really easy place to spend half or a third of what you would. Like a lot of people that buy a new car every 3 or 4 years. If you buy a used car and then keep it for 8 or 10 years, you buy it used, you get it half of what it is new, even today. If you buy it 3 or 4 years old, right? And you take it as old as you need to be to get it for half price, and then you keep it for 8 or 10 years, well, you're spending only a small fraction of the people who get it. So now you take that money and say, what that means is I can spend an extra $10,000 a year on travel, or I can. Or so when you see that, when I say I have this much money for my non-discretionary, which part adds the most to my life? And I find it's going through these decisions about your life that makes your life what you think it is. Like a lot of people go through life, they just get into a certain lifestyle and they just keep living that lifestyle, but they don't stop and think. Every single thing that you have could be changed. Like what's important to you. For example, you don't need phone and TV and all these things if you don't want. Just get rid of all those and have more money for travel or for entertainment. You know what I mean? So if you look at all the expenses, the neat part about a budget is you start by looking at what you are spending your money on, and then you stop and think, what do I actually want to spend my money on? That's even for people planning for retirement. That's kind of phase 2. What is more important to me? Where do I want to spend more? Or what's less important? I don't care. And then you design your retirement lifestyle after that. So those are all, I find, really important pieces to make a financial plan really speak to you and your life. It's really, I say a financial plan is really a life plan. That's really what it is, if you do it properly.
Exactly. And you need to know what those actual real expenses are by actually monitoring your spending and knowing what they are so that you can actually make those decisions. As opposed to going, I think you mentioned this already, some places they'll just say, oh, let's just use some percentage rule of thumb. I'm sure we've all heard these now, right? Where, your retirement income needed is X% of your pre-retirement income. And it's like, well, where are you getting this from? That can vary so wildly from person to person. You can't just use that as a blanket percentage, no matter what your situation.
Exactly is. We've done well over 1,000, comprehensive plans. But I think if I took the average of all of them, the retirement goal is probably about 80% of what they're making before. It's probably the average. However, I've done them at 35% and I've done them at 250%. You could choose something different in your life. You get a fair amount of money. You think, wow, I want to spend quite a bit more in retirement. I would do a lot more travel. Especially if you're young when you're starting, your income isn't that high yet. I think I'm going to retire in 30 years. And at that point, I'm going to save up a lot. At that point, I'm going to be, live quite a really comfortable life. And there's other people that have, they're in the city with an expensive lifestyle and they want this lifestyle. They got kids in the house and stuff, but then they're going to retire and they're going to move out to the country and buy this inexpensive place and stay home and not travel. And so you can choose to spend a lot less. And that actually, if you're trying to be financially independent, you can get it quicker if you choose it a frugal retirement, right? So to me, it's 80%. That's a ridiculous thing. It can vary hugely by person and by situation and by what you want in your life.
For sure, yeah. One couple living in Toronto might decide, okay, we're going to move to some inexpensive rural area, outskirts of Canada, and we're going to live simply, and that's going to be a retirement. We're going to relax there. Versus another couple might be like, oh, we currently live in an average, like a medium expensive area. We're going to move to Toronto so we could finally enjoy all the cool things Toronto has to offer, and we're going to do that in retirement. I mean, those are two completely different things. Both couples are retiring. One's going to have way different expenses than the other. So to just say, oh, let's just make it 80% of your pre-retirement income and apply that to both couples, that sounds ridiculous.
Exactly. Yeah. So in our house plan, we look at, here's the house you're in. We have the current house cost, but okay, the retirement goal is, where do you think you're going to be living at that point? Like, is it still the same city, or is it like sometimes they'll say, I'm going to downsize my house. I'm going to buy, a condo or a bungalow or whatever. Well, you know what? That's probably around the same price anyway. So it doesn't really change the budget much. But, if you want to save a lot, you got to, in Toronto, if you want to save a lot on house costs, you basically have to leave Toronto.
Yeah.
Or you just buy a small condo and then you spend much of your time traveling. But I think it's important to think of, where do you want to live? What's the lifestyle I want to have? Where do I want to live? You can buy an inexpensive condo or whatever it is. And that's, if you want to travel a lot in retirement, then a condo is beautiful because you just walk up and leave. If you have a big 4-bedroom house in the suburbs and now you're going to spend 4, 5, 6 months traveling, who's looking after this thing while you're away? It's a problem now, right? So you think of your overall life. Where do you want to live? Where are you going to be? What home are you going to have is an important piece of that. And yeah, so again, it's not the 80% to me. That's not even a financial plan. You go to a financial planner and they say, oh, you're going to spend 75% of what you are now. That's not a financial plan.
To me, that's an alarm that person just wants to talk to you about what investments you're holding because they want to sell you some investments that they get some commission from.
Exactly. I did some financial planning. Now let's talk about investments. Right?
Yeah. We spend 5% of the meeting time talking about your financial plan. Now let's spend 95% talking about what investments you should have in your portfolio. And oh, what a coincidence. These are the ones my firm sells. And then they try to sell you those, right? Yeah. To me, that's a red flag for sure.
Exactly. It's a red flag. And much of the financial planning world, most of them are really investment sales people or insurance sales people, right? So you want someone that's good. You want to actually do this plan in detail, make your life plan. How do you want to live your life? Live life on purpose.
It's interesting. And tell me if you agree with this, because I've noticed a bit that the real financial planners that actually do the comprehensive plan, if you look at, let's say they spend X hours with a client, the good ones, it seems, will spend the overwhelming majority of the time talking about the actual plan and analyzing and running different scenarios. Whereas the ones that are just there to sell you product, but they have to be able to say, oh, we can still do a financial plan. It's the inverse, right? So they'll spend like 95% of the time talking about the investments that are in the plan and only 5% actually talking about the plan. You know what I mean? Whereas the good ones, it's the other way around, where they're spending like 95% of the time talking about the actual plan and only 5% about the investments. Would you agree with that, or what are your thoughts?
That's it exactly, yes. And actually, so we're fee-for-service financial planners. Like, we write a financial plan and charge a fee for it. Like, this is how you get a real plan. Like, to me, if you have a bank that's giving you a free plan, that's probably what it's worth, right? It's a loss leader to get you in to sell investments, but it isn't a real plan. So you do the actual planning. We don't even sell investments. We refer them all out, top investors. But when we have a financial planning meeting, we don't even talk about investments other than we do a little bit of risk disclosure. So in a financial plan, we have to put a rate of return on investment. And the biggest factor on that is the asset allocation. So we spend 15 minutes or whatever talking about risk level and asset allocation that fits the plan. Other than that, we didn't even talk about investments. Our main financial planning, a lot of people would be shocked by this. It's 4 or 5 hours long. That's the main meeting. We start out, this is where you are in your life, right? This is what's defined the retirement that you want. This is where you are standing with that. This is how do you optimize your RSPs and where should you invest? How do you optimize your tax and what strategies should we do? And each one of those, we show you the effect of it all. And then we have a little bit of investments in it, but it's almost all about the planning and about your life. And most couples, one person's kind of into finance and one is not. We find that both people will be into a 5-hour meeting and they enjoy the whole thing. Because if you're talking about your life, that's interesting. You're talking about a bunch of numbers, mumbo jumbo, that's not interesting. But here we're talking about your life. What's the lifestyle you want to have? You want to travel more? You want to, that's interesting for everybody. And so that's the difference when you get a real plan versus, the lost leader, exactly what you said.
Yeah. Or here's some whole life insurance policy I want to sell you. You know what I mean? And they're talking to you about whole life insurance and how that should be an investment instead of you doing your own investments because they get massive commissions on those. So
where you put this much money away and then you have $1 million as if, is that enough money? Like, which say it's not that much, but that's how they always have this projection, how you get to $1 million. You put a cover sheet on it, it's a really nice cover sheet that says your name and it says financial plan. That's not a financial plan. Like a financial plan is your life plan. Wow, how are you going to live?
So while we're on the subject of investments, I guess we should disclose I think this is the only area that I've ran into where you and I aren't fully aligned because we seem to be aligned on everything else is the whole investment piece, right? So Ed and I talk a lot about financial planning and optimizing. I guess the one area that we do see things differently is as listeners of the show know, I'm purely an index investor, just total market index investing. I do it through ETFs versus Ed, he does things more on the active side. And we're actually using like fund managers that he's been screening and looking at, that kind of thing. So I did want to just disclose that just to be fully transparent about everything, where that is one area where we differ. But when it comes to things like the tax optimization and strategies and things of that nature, I can't think of anything else we currently disagree on that.
All the planning and tax and all that, those are all common sense, and we agree. But I think basically we're trying to do the same thing in a slightly different, in a different method. Because what we're both trying to do is, what I found is from writing over financial plans is you need a decent rate of return, like high equity portion. Let's say, we often use 8% a year as a long-term, somewhat conservative return for a 100% equity portfolio. So let's say you're going to be that high in equities. So now we're trying to figure out, okay, how do we get 8% after fees as a long-term average, conservatively, if it's a bad kind of period, right? Now you would do it with indexes. And to me, if you that are not really super knowledgeable in investing, I would agree with that. The best thing is buy a broad index, one or two of them, and then you're going to get close to index returns, and that's going to beat most people out there. And what you're trying to get is the equity index level return or something very close to it as a long-term average, right? So in my case, we've been in the invested industry, so we know fund managers, and actually we work with a portfolio manager that specifically looks for these. There's a small number of fund managers that have long-term track records beating the index. And so we're trying to get, more than the index. And part of it is we're just trying to pay our fee. I figure, if we have fund managers that make the full index return after all fees, including ours, that we didn't even cost you anything, and now you're getting all our advice.
Awesome. Yeah, I just thought I'd mention that. Yeah, just so that, because I've had questions like that. And then I explained to the listeners when they ask this as well, there's the investing side, what you actually invest in, and then there's the financial planning, tax optimization side. So those are two different areas. I think is a good way to think about it. And so you and I, when we chat and we strategize, it's exclusively on the financial planning, tax optimization side. We don't really talk about specific investments because at this point, you're like, oh, well, Cornell's just going to go buy the index and then he's done on the investment side. So it's more a question. So our conversations are more like, okay, well, which account should you buy? Should you put that in your corporate account and your RSP, TFSA? How's it going to impact your Canada Child Benefit? So those are the conversations that Ed and I have.
Oh, those are really important things. Yeah. So, we've had clients that saw us on a podcast and then they contact me and then they realize that they've been following you for a long time. And then, so they really interesting financial plan, but I only believe in index. So look, we're kind of trying to get the index return anyway. But this is where we really add value. Like you need to be able to do the planning part, do your life plan, do your tax optimizing, get all these things worked out right. That's where you make a big difference. If you don't get those things right, I always like to say investing is the last 20% of a financial plan, maybe the last 10% of a financial plan. Like you got to do the rest of it first.
Yeah. So we do that 80% together, and then Cornell just goes off and buys his own investments as ETFs.
The last part, we're trying to get a similar result with a different method.
Yeah.
You still need to get, even your plan has 8% as a target long-term rate of return, right? So we're going to invest so that we get that in a way that we get that as a long-term return after fees, even if it's not a great, market time the next few decades. So that we got to invest in a way that will achieve that. And whatever achieves that gives you the life that you want.
And now a quick message from one of our sponsors. There are so many opinions on how to invest your money today, but it can be hard to find credible voices to rely on in the world of finance and investing. One resource I turn to every week is the ETF Market Insights YouTube channel, led by today's episode sponsor, BMO ETFs. Market Insights brings in industry experts, and their weekly episodes cover the hottest themes like inflation, infrastructure, healthcare, and more. Tuning in helps me stay up to date on what's happening so I can be a smarter investor. And you can also submit your own ETF questions to be answered on the show. So do yourself a favor and subscribe on YouTube to ETF Market Insights or visit etfmarketinsights.com so you can be notified when future episodes go live. And so Ed, let's switch things back to the financial planning side of things. Another really interesting insight that you brought up when you were updating our financial plan was that when it comes to a strategy for paying the least amount of tax, you typically want to either defer paying tax as long as possible, and a good example of this would be using a tool like the RRSP, for example, or you instead focus on managing your income to always be in the lowest tax bracket once you hit financial independence / retirement. So for example, taking advantage on how different accounts like the TFSA and RSP are taxed, so that you and your partner are always in that lowest tax bracket when you're living off your portfolio. So to summarize this, there's that keep deferring as long as you possibly can strategy. And then the other strategy is the let's always be in the lowest tax bracket strategy. Can you talk about these two strategies, how they typically work, which one is better suited for who? And feel free to use me as a case study if you'd like, just since we actually ended up switching strategies after the financial planning that you did for us, which was interesting because we were in one bucket, and then after talking, you were like, actually, Cornell, I remember you telling me this, you actually switched to the other one. Like in our case, it was the just defer as long as you possibly can. So did you want to talk about that? Because I think for a lot of people, the default is always lowest tax bracket in retirement. Like once you hit FI, that's the goal, and you want to optimize things around that. In our case, it was a little bit of different. So there is some nuance to this. Can you speak to that a bit?
Yes, exactly. So there are those two overall plans. So anybody that retires, to optimize, you want to pay the lowest lifetime tax after you retire. And it could be one of those two things. It could be defer tax as long as you can, always better pay later. Or it could be take as much taxable income, but always stay in your current tax. But you got to look at the difference between it and what happens in each case to see what actually happens. And for example, let's say you're going to defer as long as possible. Then what would happen for a lot of people is you would start by spending all your non-registered and all your TFSA and don't even touch the RSP. And then when you turn 72 and a half, you take the lowest possible amount, and you're spending all your non-taxable or low tax up first. And then at the end, you're left with only fully taxable. So now, but you've deferred a lot of tax and you've saved tax in between. But then all of that stuff quite possibly pushes you, for most people, pushes into a higher tax bracket. So when we're doing the planning, we're thinking, okay, how much higher a bracket is going to be? And how many years from now before we get pushed into that higher bracket? Okay. And the extreme of that is if you just keep leaving it, what happens is you're fine for much of your life, but then you die, and in your estate, everything becomes taxable, and you're in this 54% tax bracket in your year of death. But you're 60 now, you're 40 now, and let's say you pay 54% tax when you're 95. Honestly, that's not really a problem. I'd rather pay 54% decades from now than 20 now. But when there's that trade-off, and we have a way of calculating how do you know which one to do? But each case, you got to look at it more specifically to see how it is different. So your case is actually quite unique, but we do find other people with the same situation and with a different thing. So you're actually in a higher tax bracket today than you're going to be later on. And it's because this is the problem with the people with FI is you're actually retired with kids in the house, right? And so you're getting this Canada Child benefit, but it's clawed back when you have a 13.5% clawback on all of that, in addition to income tax. And eventually that's going to stop when your kids get to 18. So you're actually in a higher tax bracket today than later on. We sometimes get the opposite. We can get people that retire at 65, and there's the guaranteed income supplement. They can actually, if they only live off their TFSA and non-registered, even though they get a fair amount of cash income, they have very low taxable income, and they can actually get this guaranteed income supplement, and it's got a 50% clawback, 50. Okay. But if you do that, you have to really be careful not to trigger tax. But again, then in essence, you're in a higher tax bracket. Usually you can't maintain it. You can only retain it for a few years, and then you run out of TFSA stuff, and then you can't get it anymore. But it's the same thing. You're in a high tax bracket for a few years and then lower after that. So we always look at one of the things that we do that I haven't actually seen anywhere else is we look at tax brackets, including clawbacks of government programs. So for most people over 65, the guaranteed income supplement is the old age security is clawed back 15%. And there's a bit of a GST credit clawback. And there's a few other government things that are small things that are clawed back. So in your case, you're nowhere close to that yet. You're way too young, but you're getting the Canada Child benefit clawback. So you're actually in a higher bracket now than later. So we want to defer tax as long as possible. So we wouldn't, like, in theory, you could take your RSP, convert it to a RIF, and take some out, and you only pay you'd always be in the lowest tax bracket on it. Except in your case, you'd also lose the clawback on it. So in your case, we don't want to touch anything that's taxable. So for you, what actually makes most sense is don't touch your RSP at all. In fact, believe it or not, even though you're retired, it's worth still contributing to your RSP. Like, if you have any room, keep putting it in. And your TFSA, because we're trying to, if it grows the TFSA, there's no tax on it. What you have investments that are invested, stay there. Plus, you've got your business. podcasts and stuff, it's in a corporation. Don't take anything out of there. Just let money accumulate in there and just live off your non-registered and you TFSA or just you're non-registered for now. Just live off that, have the lowest tax at all. That's how you pay the least tax now. And try to live like that way until all your kids are out of the house and you're no longer getting Canada Child benefits. And then you can relax it more. Because that it changes your tax bracket a lot.
I'm going to refer people to you made a YouTube video on this. You wrote an article about this. And so this is something that I think is worth for parents to check out, especially if, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think this is especially applicable to parents who have kids, obviously, and they actually maybe have some investments in their taxable accounts, because that's going to very heavily impact their Canada Child benefit, how much they receive. And maybe they're debating, oh, should I do RSP? Should I do TFSA? And so this becomes very relevant to you because, again, if you do something like RSP, it's going to lower your income and therefore you're going to get more of the Canada Child benefit. And so it's a very applicable to parents who have, let's say, have maxed out their RSPs and TFSAs and they're now dealing with taxable investments. If that's your situation, I know that's like probably a small subset of the population, but if that's you, really, I do recommend you get some help on this with an accountant or a financial planner like Ed, because it is a pretty complicated tax situation to try to optimize all of that. But yeah, so I'm going to just quickly mention your page here, Ed, just for anybody that wants to dive a little bit deeper into this. As soon as we get off here, I'm going to set up like a little link that people can go to easily and they'll just get redirected automatically to your page. So if you're listening to this episode now, that link is up and you can get there right away. It's buildwealthcanada.ca/CCB Ed, all one word. So buildwealthcanada.ca/CCB. So that stands for Canada Child Benefit. So CCB Ed. And if you go there, that's going to just directly forward you basically to Ed's post that he made on this. And it's something really worth reading into. It can let you have some good quality conversations with your accountant. Ed's not paying me to promote this or anything like that. I just think it's a really valuable resource for you, because especially you might be reading a lot of different blog posts out there. And if you're investing in taxable accounts, they'll tell you certain things like, oh, all your Canadian equities should definitely always go into your non-registered account, your taxable account, because you get a dividend tax credit. And so, yeah, that all sounds great. But then wait a minute, if you're getting CCB, then you're going to get a dividend tax credit, but you're also going to get clawed back and there's a gross up. It gets pretty complicated. But long story short is that the optimum situation, the default optimum tax way of doing things when you don't have kids can actually be pretty different once you do have kids, as was the case for us. So if you're in that pool of people, I think it's definitely worth for you to check it out. Does this apply less so to people who, let's say, you have kids, but you don't have anything in taxable investments? You're not you're basically just trying to max out your TFSA and RSP every year, and that's pretty much it. Is that less relevant in those situations because it's someone that has like a regular job and they're just trying to max out the registered investments?
So do you want me to share that one chart that you in the page?
Yeah, sure.
Share
yeah.
it here. Just
I was going to share the screen, and then so this will be on YouTube eventually, and then you'll be able to see it. But again, if you want to see this chart and you're listening to just the audio version, just go to that link I gave you, buildwealthcanada.ca/CCB Ed, and that's going to have this full blog post video, and then you can kind of get into the nitty gritty to fully wrap your head around what Ed's talking about. But yeah, it is something worth your time because the CCB it's many thousands of dollars potentially of after-tax dollars in your pocket if you do this correctly. And so it's definitely worth, it's not like, you're clipping a 10-cent coupon. It's depending how many kids you have, like it can be like 10,000 plus potentially dollars of after-tax money. So, it is something that's worth digging into and learning a little bit more about and having an intelligent conversation with your accountant and financial planner about. So I'll stop talking. Ed, did you want to go into this a bit now?
I have this Tax Club Parents video in my blog, and that's what Cornell's referring to. And, CCB is actually quite a lot of money. Like, if you look at it here, like with two kids, like you're getting over $7,000 for the youngest, no over 6, so $13,000, $14,000 a year tax-free that you're getting, which is a fair amount of money. And so here's the difference. There's a clawback of 13.5%, and it starts at $35,000 family income. So in your case, because you're splitting your income between you and your wife, it's taxable income of $17,500 each. It's that low that you're in this bracket. So in this chart, this is the actual income tax bracket, and the tax brackets in the 20s go all the way up to $55,000. However, because of the CCB, you're in a 34% tax bracket starting at $17,500 taxable income. That's really low. Correct. And you're spending, you have a fairly, not somewhat frugal, but comfortable retirement. It's way more than 17,000. Then you actually have to plan. That's why you don't want to trigger, you want to try to trigger as little taxable income as you want. So part of it is the type of account. So you say, people who don't have non-registered account, then it becomes, do you take money out of RSP or out of TFSA? Like, which account do you take it from? And that makes a complete difference. But also it can make a difference. Some people retired and still have RSP room. Actually worth putting the money in. You can even put more in and claim some every year so that you stay in this bracket. You can defer it. But you want to keep your taxable income. Somehow you want to live your comfortable lifestyle and live quite comfortably, and yet still have your taxable income of only 17,000 for each of you. And that takes a lot of planning to be able to do that. And yeah, I run a fair number of people that are exactly what you said, dividend investors. So the ones that have non-registered portfolios, they try to put Canadian equity dividend stocks in the non-registered because the tax rate is low. However, the clawback rate is high because so let's say you get 10,000 in dividends, it's grossed up by 38%. So it's like 14,000 of taxable income. And so if it already pushes you into this bracket, and now remember it's a 13.5% clawback, but now it's a clawback on the grossed up income by 38%. So you're paying almost 20% of a clawback. So for those people, it's 20% income tax plus 20% clawback on your kind of child benefit, and you're effectively in a 40% tax bracket. So it's hugely different. So now if you don't get Canadian dividends, even if you get just foreign dividends, or if you just invest, just take some capital gains, sell a bit, we call them self-made dividends, where you sell a bit of your investment each month to give you the taxable income that you want. And then it's only a bit of capital gains that you trigger, and it's only the half of that that's taxable. So now you're getting the same cash flow, but the taxable income is way less. It's like 1/10 of what would be if you had dividend stocks. And now your clawback is way less. So yeah, like you said, it's a complicated topic, but getting all of this right makes a huge difference in your tax. And the thing is, it's not just 1 year. This is every year. Like in your case, it's 15 years of this.
Yeah. It's not just, an extra, like let's say you got it fully nicely optimized. It's not just an extra 10K after tax for 1 year. And even that alone would make it worth it because it's 10 grand, right? But like you said, this is an annual thing now until your kids get older. So it's a very, again, if you're thinking of like return on time invested, this is something that is it's a rabbit hole, I would say, worth going down if you're a parent in this particular situation, just to see. And I should clarify too, just so that there's no confusion. So Ed refers to this as tax, and some people might get a bit confused by that because you're still going to be, let's say, in the lowest tax bracket from like a personal income tax perspective, let's say. But what Ed's doing in these charts is he's basically tacking on what you are eligible to get in your CCB and recalculating the tax rates if the CCB is factored in. So just, I don't want there to be any confusion where someone's, I make under 50,000 a year in retirement. Ed says I'm no longer in the lowest tax bracket. And it's like, well, from a personal income tax perspective, you are, but if we tack on the CCB piece, then it's actually effectively more than that because we're tacking on the clawback that comes into play. Did I explain that okay, Ed? I just want to make sure that people aren't thinking that like they're actually jumping on the personal income tax thing as well.
Right, exactly. So I call it the effective tax rate. And you're right, the CCB clawback isn't actually tax. However, in all respects, it's the same thing. Basically, it's money that you don't get and the government gets instead because of your taxable income. That's what.
Yeah, that's a really great way you just defined it there. Yeah, and for people that don't have kids, the GIS is the same thing, the same kind of thing. Yeah,
it's exactly the same thing. So that's why I show this. This is the effective tax rate on this chart with actual tax plus whatever the clawback is where you are.
Awesome. Yeah, so definitely check that out, guys. It's really, it can make your head hurt a bit because it does get pretty complicated, particularly if you've got like a business or you've got taxable investments, non-taxable. How do you optimize? It's basically this puzzle that you're trying to solve to optimize for. But again, it is like potentially a 5+ figure sum that you get legally, willingly from the government if you are able to do it right. And the thing, and like you said as well, some people, they shoot themselves in the foot because they see these blog posts about how dividend investing is the best thing since sliced bread. And yeah, we're in Canada, so let's do Canadian dividends in our taxable accounts because we get a dividend tax credit. And so people drink that Kool-Aid and then they get major CCB clawbacks. because of the gross sum that we get on Canadian dividends. So again, a complex subject, but just be really careful because there's a lot of it's easy to take shortcuts on this stuff. And then there's this like some caveats that can completely change the situation for you.
Yeah, people can take money out of their RSP or take the dividends, whatever it is, and now they lose basically all their the CCB, right? And so in your case is kind of unique, but CCB is a big number. So remember, you're getting more than 13,000 a year, and you're getting this is 3, so you're getting it for like 15 years. So 13,000 times 15 years. I mean, this is close to 200,000 after tax money, right? Well, this is not insignificant. It's a significant number in the scheme of things. So let's plan so that it works out for you.
Sure. Awesome, Ed. Well, thanks for sharing the insights with us. That was really helpful. Definitely, we're going to have you back because we've got some other things, some good insights that we also discovered that I think are highly applicable to listeners of the show. Again, we were kind of using myself as a case study, and we were basically trying to pick out the things that we think would also apply to listeners of the show so that you can save some money and hopefully hit your FI number sooner. Or if you've already hit it, then to basically have a sustainable retirement as well from a financial side. So I hope that was really helpful for you. Ed, can you tell us a little bit more about your practice, what you do, both on the financial planning side, but also all the educational content that you produce on your blog and on YouTube as well? You do a lot of free education that I think is worth calling out.
Yes. So, I mean, I'm two things. First, I'm a planner and a blogger. The blog is where I get a lot of the biggest satisfaction, So I'm like trying to educate Canadians based on all the things that I've learned at the financial planner. There's lots of bloggers out there. The difference is I've actually written, well over 1,000 comprehensive financial plans. There's people that are investment people talking about investment things. And then there's a lot of bloggers that are young people with trying to be helpful, but I come up with a very different view. Because I see the financial plans, I do a lot of things I think a lot of people think are aggressive. But to me, they're just natural because I try to make a financial plan work. Most of the investment industry people talk about being within your risk tolerance and having balanced portfolios. But then what's your long-term rate of return then? Maybe 5% a year or something, 5 or 6. And I try to do a financial plan with a 5 or 6% rate of return, and nobody can retire. Nobody can get the retirement that they want. So I said, okay, you know what? But if you had 8%, if you have an equity return, then you can have what you want. So either you got to work an extra 15 years, or you can learn to get comfortable with higher equities. And same thing. We have a few different strategies, like leverage type strategies, and it's the same kind of thing. It is more risky. However, as a life choice versus working another 10 years, what do you want to do? And you have to make sure that you can do this properly. You have to be able to stick with it even when things are down. That's kind of, I think, our unique. We're a kind of a growth type of outlook. So you get quite a bit of the blog. It's about that. Plus I'm a CPA, so also do all these tax things, very intricate tax, but all the how to planning and how to plan it. And then the growth focus, which actually helps achieve it. That's all within my blog. So I think you're like what Canada's top financial podcaster, and my blog is actually #1 in Canada for people that are full service financial planners. And I just actually have a YouTube channel and a podcast nowhere close to as popular as yours, but at least got all that out there. And, so our practice, we do two things. One is write financial plans we have a team of financial planners that do work together now. So we write financial plans for a fee. And then we take on a certain number of clients full service where we help you implement it and work with over the years to be able to achieve it. And part of that, we do tax returns for full service clients and review your plan regularly. And we're your financial guru for kind of everything. So that's what we do from the financial planning side. But I actually spend much of my own time now with trying to do better, more informative blogs and podcasts and all that.
Awesome, Ed. Yeah, so definitely encourage people to check out your website, edrempel.com. If you go there, I know you put up your YouTube videos on there as well that are on YouTube. So that's like your one-stop shop where you'll see the blog post, you'll see the podcast, you'll see the video, everything is there. Really, really good, free, but extremely valuable information that I followed for many years at this point. So definitely I encourage you to check it out. So it's just Ed, E-D, and then Rempel, REMPEL.com. And that's where you can get it, or just Google Ed Rempel and you'll see it as well, or Google him on YouTube if you want to see just the videos. But yeah, definitely really good education. And Ed, thanks again for coming on.
And we created these pretty links. So it's edrempel.com/watch is the YouTube channel.
Nice.
edrempel.com/listen is the podcast.
Oh, perfect. I didn't know that. That's awesome. There you go. Wonderful.
Nice and easy to find these things. Whatever way that you prefer to view it. So it's called unconventional wisdom. It's the things that it's a different outlook than you get from anywhere else, but it's what actually works.
Awesome. Okay, so you got something for the readers, you've got something for the listeners, and you got something for the watchers. So no matter how you like to consume your content, you got it all covered. So that's awesome. Yeah, definitely a great resource. Like I said, I've been following it for a long time. And actually does crunch the numbers himself. He doesn't just regurgitate what 20 other articles online said. So I find that's really nice because you actually do get a unique perspective and you question some of the common sense, what people think are common sense wisdoms. It's really valuable. And welcome. Great to have you back. And we will definitely do another one to cover some more things that we think can help Canadians. So thanks again.
All right. Thanks for having me, Cornell.
Right. Take care. Bye. All right. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Please share it with someone that you think may find it useful. And of course, leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify is always super appreciated as well. I'd like to end with a big thanks to one of our sponsors who, apart from my investing course, literally keeps the entire Build Wealth Canada podcast and website free for you. Do you know why asset allocation ETFs have become so popular? Asset allocation explains over 90% of the variation in a portfolio's quarterly return. So it's no wonder Canadian investors are turning to these ETFs. Today's sponsor, BMO ETFs, offers these innovative all-in-one solutions with the BMO All Equity ETF, ZEQT, the BMO Growth ETF, ZGRO, the BMO Balanced ETF, ZBAL, and the BMO Conservative ETF, ZCON, and many more. BMO developed these to help provide investors with ETFs that offer broad diversification and are also low cost and simple to use. These ETFs invest in a number of underlying index-based ETFs and are rebalanced automatically back to your set asset allocation or mix of stocks and bonds. They offer a hands-free approach to investing that is built on disciplined weights to provide exposure to different geographies and sectors all in one solution. BMO actually offers 8 asset allocation ETFs, and you can learn more at bmoetfs.com.
Thanks for listening to the Build Wealth Canada podcast at www.buildwealthcanada.ca.